the intellectual basis for the incorporation of counter-ideology initiatives in counter-terrorism work today. Now, one way to ascertain the centrality of counter-ideology in countering violent extremism is by assessing the importance of ideology to violent extremists themselves through their words and deeds. If you study violent extremist groups, you will find that they place a tremendous effort on ideological work, such as constructing their ideology, criticizing opposing ideologies, and justifying their actions from the lens of their ideology. Their objective is to spread their worldview and ideas. This can be clearly seen from Al-Maqdisi's official website, which also functions as the largest repository of violent extremist intellectual materials by the ideologues and groups. What we find in Al-Maqdisi website are not mere narratives, stories, news about the world to win people over to them. There are hundreds of materials that cover not only on matters of jihad, but also the worldview that underlies their actions and fatwas on various theological issues. The importance of this website and its contents was underscored in the study found in the Militant Ideology Atlas by Combating Terrorism Center, US Military Academy. The ideological work of the first Bali bombers is another good example to prove the centrality of ideology for violent extremists. Imam Samudra, for example, the operational leader of the bombing, published a book detailing his worldview and theological justification of the action. Despite being incarcerated, he and his two accomplices, Mukhlas and Ambrose, ensured a constant supply of their ideas through their writings. In fact, the trio published a book each to promote their ideology just before their execution. The thriving of violent extremist publications in Indonesia, as reported by the International Crisis Group, also pointed to the same motive. The act of former violent extremists who have renounced violence and Al-Qaeda's ideology is also a significant indicator of the centrality of ideology. These are, as examples, those who are currently renounced their previous violent ideology. They are the leaders of the Egyptian Al-Jamaah Islamiyah. Sayyid Imam Al-Sharif, also known as Dr. Fadl, an influential leader of the Egyptian Tanzim Al-Jihad, who is also an important ideologue within the jihadist circle, and senior members of the Indonesian Jamaah Islamiyah, such as Nasir Abbas and Ali Imran. Altogether, they have published more than 25 volumes to counter Al-Qaeda's ideology and point out the fallacy of their previous views on jihad. Dr. Fadl's ideological refutation to Al-Qaeda has even invited Ayman al-Zawahiri to respond with 200-page book, which again testifies the importance of ideology to violent extremists. Now, despite their tendency to extreme measures, violent extremists work in accordance to rational calculation. Despite their prominence post-9/11 attacks, many violent extremist groups and leaders have actually been operating for decades. Thus, taking into consideration that their past experience and their rational behaviors, it logically follows that they would not have spent so much of their resources and effort on those ideological materials if they were not important to them, did not serve their cause, or if there were no demand for such materials. The profile of violent extremists shows that not all of them commit extremism, terrorism, because of poverty or economic marginalization as perceived by some. However, although I strongly argue for the centrality of ideology in counter-terrorism, I do not seek in this presentation to offer a causal nexus between ideology and terrorism. Some scholars who study terrorism tend towards a causal explanation. This tendency usually seeks to identify a single factor that directly causes terrorism. Others are, however, of the view that there is no single cause to terrorism, at least for now, and this is the dominant and prevalent view among scholars of terrorism. They also observe that there is no single explanation to the path of radicalization that leads to terrorism, although the proponent of this view regards the centrality of ideology among other important factors. Terrorism and radicalization remain a complex phenomenon that would defy a single causal explanation attempt. I am with this view, with this position. I recognize that there could be other important factors for terrorism, despite the centrality of ideology, and it is prudent for counter-terrorism work to adopt a multi-dimensional or multifaceted approach. However, the identification of those other factors than ideology and their impact on counter-terrorism work are not within the scope of today's presentation. For the purpose of this presentation, I define ideology as any system of ideas underlying and informing social and political action. To be honest, the importance of ideology in current wave of terrorism and the centrality of counter-ideology in counter-terrorism are not uncontested, meaning that there are scholars who disagree with this position. This is for sharing purpose. Some of the contestation comes from the work of Mark Seichmann in this book,